So it's been a good 30 to 45 minutes. And as I realized what was going on, I had to add another nail. So you'll see on the board that I've added the mass of the third nail. We have a 7.18 grams of iron inside of our container now. And it still hasn't completely finished reacting. I know this because my flask, instead of being dark and slightly green like this, it should be kind of a clear color. So we're going to do this a little bit different even in class. We're not going to only use 3 to add up to 7.18. We're going to use about 5 different nails, which means that you're going to need to be careful as you do this. You're going to still want to add them in there all at one time. We're going to kind of mix it up a little bit, and then when we get done, it's going to take some time to rinse off what we're talking about. During the reaction, something crazy has been happening, and what you're going to do next is you're going to take each nail out of the flask one at a time using a pair of tongs. On each nail, there's going to be basically some stuff. The product is stuck to the nail. And you're just going to use a distilled water bottle and a jet in order to rinse as much of that product off of the nail as you can. Again, it is important that you make sure that it all goes in to the flask. You don't want this going into the air. You don't want it going anywhere else. I'm having a hard time here being able to get a hold of it. And I want all of the junk that I'm washing off to fall into my solution. So again, as I do this, as I rinse it off, I'll then have a paper towel ready, which I didn't do. I'll have a paper towel ready to be able to place the nail onto to start to dry. We don't want any of our reactant to be there. We want just the nail to go there. We don't want any of the product to be on that piece of paper. So again, I have 3 nails inside here. I'm trying to find another one. Usually help if I use my right hand since I am right-handed. And again, as I pull the nail out, it's important that I rinse off all of the stuff using the distilled water. If you put it down inside the flask, you can use a stronger jet. We're getting all of the product to rinse off of the nail and go inside the flask. If you get to a point where you're starting to have too much water, that's okay. We're going to go ahead and skip to that part right now anyway. But again, you want to keep trying to get as much of that product off there as you can. So again, let me just take the third one out. I'm not going to take the time to rinse it off completely. I'm going to give it a quick squirt, and we're going to talk about what comes next. All right, so I'm rinsing all that stuff off. All right, so there we go. Quick rinse. So now I still have nails. They're not what they used to be. There's been a reaction that takes place. Now inside here I have a product and I have the leftover solution. It's called oh, I forgot the name of the stuff. Well, it doesn't have a real name. Anyway, it's the leftover liquid portion of the reaction. And it says to decant this solution into another flask. So I have here a beaker. It's supposed to be clean and dry. Doesn't matter because of what I'm about to do. And you're going to be pouring this liquid out of this container. We don't want any of the solid to go into this container. So we're going to do what's called decanting. There's this funny property about water that likes to stick to other substances. And so if I were to put this up against the up against the beaker, right on the mouth of the opening, and pour slowly, all of the liquid will go down my stir rod. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this very well on the camera. I'm going to move up to the edge here, and I'm going to try to get it into the picture, and I'm going to zoom it in so you can see what I'm talking about. Sorry. This is why you need a camera person, not trying to do it all by yourself all the time. So there's my solution. And now we're going to do what's called decanting. I'm going to pour using the stir rod on the opening, and I'm going to put that where I want it to go, and the liquid should pour. I want the solids to stay behind. The liquid follows the little flask, follows the stir rod, goes into my solution, and I don't want any of the solid to go with it. This is decanting. I'm going to do it you're going to do it down there nice and slow and carefully. I'm going to show you what it looks like from a little higher so you can see what's happening here. It travels down, if I'm going slow enough, it will travel down the stir rod and go exactly where I want it to do. It helps us control our pouring so it goes where it's supposed to go. Again, I'm not going to finish the whole process here because that's not the point of what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is just make sure you understand how this is going to take place. So again, back over, that's too far. Where am I? Right about there. And we're going to zoom back out. There we go. All right, so at this point, you'll have measured out the nails. You'll have measured out all of the solution. You've poured all of that in there. And then the idea is that you need to rinse your product. Once I get done decanting all of the liquid off, there's going to be a product inside here. You're then going to use distilled water. You're going to use approximately 25 milliliters. You can use the same graduated cylinder you used before. If you rinse it out, don't just pour this back in there, but you're going to rinse the product 3 times. So again, you're going to add 25 milliliters, stir it around, stir it up, decant it off again. I realize you won't be able to get all of the liquid off of there because you don't want the solid to go out with it. It is very, very important that you keep the solid behind inside this flask. So as you pour it out, as the water goes and it leaves behind the solid, you're going to then rinse it and pour that water out. And then rinse it and pour that water out, and rinse it and pour that water out until you're left with a nice clean sample of the powder. It's actually not powder, but you'll know what I'm talking about. Then we're not done with the lab, but we're done for today. What we need to do after that is we're going to need to dry this flask. Remember, it was clean and dry when we took the mass of the beaker at the very beginning. And now we have stuff inside of it. But we want it to be completely dry. We don't want any water involved at all. So what we're going to do is overnight, we're going to put it into an oven. I have already hooked up the oven. It's over there on that side of the room. It's that gray looking thing over there. And what we'll do is we'll put your beakers inside of there for overnight. Actually, it's going to be longer than that. It's going to be probably 3 days. And it'll be completely dry because we want it to be back to only the powder that's inside it. What we'll have done before we leave, as we put those into the oven, is we need to know the mass of our iron nails that we were starting with. The iron nails will need to be found their mass after. And I can promise you that whatever the mass was before, so I had 7.18 grams, if I were to take the mass of these 3 things, my mass is going to be less than 7.18 grams. However much it is that is less, that's how much iron actually reacted within the reaction. I need to know how much iron was used, and I'm going to find out how many grams of the product get made. That is the ultimate goal. As you look through your handout, it'll be a white handout like this. It'll have all of the instructions to follow through. It's going to tell you step by step of what you need to do. You will then need to follow that step by step, very similar to what we just did in this. So now, as you go through this, there are a couple things to keep in mind. The reactants are toxic. You must keep your goggles on. No eating or drinking no matter what during the lab. Even if you are Bobby Flay, you are not allowed to eat or drink during the lab. Then as you go through the lab, make sure that you're keeping track of your documentation of the information in a data table. The good news is your handout has a set of observations and data tables that will keep track of what you need to write down. Data table 2 says visual evidence. You won't need to put in 5 different observations. 1, maybe 2 are sufficing for that. And then finally, the analysis and conclusion questions, you'll complete all of those on the end of the second day of doing the lab. So on Friday or Monday, depending on which class you have, you will be performing this lab. On Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll find the mass of the reactant, or sorry, not the reactant, find the mass of the powder that went into the oven, and then beyond that, we'll do all of the calculations. And your homework is the lab report, and that will be due on the following class period, which will be the day that we take the test on stoichiometry. Hopefully at this point, you'll understand what to do in the lab. As you go through it, you should have no problems, and if and when you do, feel free to raise your hand. I'll come around to help you out.